What's going on, college football fans? Welcome back to the First and Long College Football Show. I am your co-host, as always, joined by my co-hosts. It's Marcus and Mason. Marcus first and Mason long, if you will, because if you ain't first, you're long. Welcome back, guys. It's been a long time since we've been able to get on here and get a live show going. As you can see, I'm all gimped up. I guess I'll do my best to explain that real quick here in a minute, and that's part of the reason why we hadn't been on that we weren't on last week. So we're so glad that you are back with us here on the First and Long College Football Show because, as you know, there's no offseason in college football anymore. We got tons to talk about. We're going to talk about LSU, what's going on down on the Bayou. We've got Ohio State, who's coming off of a national championship and has got a lot of figuring out to do going into the 2025 season as the confetti still is falling. Lots to figure out there. We've got our way too soon top 12. We're going to look at the preseason rankings and give you our best, 2 cents on looking through some of those teams and trying to think of some teams that are going to surprise everybody. There's always a couple of surprise teams. And then we've got news in the NCAA. Let's get the show kicked off. Thanks again. Y'all hit that like button. Let's go. Mason, how you doing, bro?
Doing good, man. Glad to see you're back, all in one piece. No, I can't say no broken limbs, but no, no severed limbs. I guess is a good way to put it. I hear you did your best impression of a flying squirrel.
I
Try to
did
fly
with
out of a
no
tree.
wings. With no wings.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. It was you just never know when something is gonna go wrong, and I guess a lot of people don't know on the show. We're so busy talking football all the time, we don't talk a whole lot of personal stuff on here. But with that being said, I
Now's the
love to
time.
hunt.
Now's the time. There's less football. It's time to talk a little bit about Marcus and Mason.
Siegs in the comment section says Mark does look like he has a little twitch. Look, guys, if I get too many more TBIs, I'm probably gonna be in big trouble. Certainly will be in big trouble by my wife. But I love to hunt, and part of hunting, there's a lot of work that goes into hunting if you really really love it. And I've got a piece of property that I really love and love working on it. So naturally, as soon as the deer season's over, I'm going to be the try hard. I'm going to be that guy that's already out there getting ready for next season. And no good deeds go unpunished. That's how it goes. I swear, I'm hanging a deer stand for a fellow hunter in the club and get it set up. The floor just falls right out from under me. And the stand was nice enough to grab me by the belt on the way down. Only reason I know this is because I have a huge gash on my back from this metal rod that grabbed onto my back, and it just grabbed onto me long enough to fling me forward, where I nosedived 20 feet to the ground and broke my collarbone, broke my wrist, and I've got some unbelievably sore ribs and back, and but really the worst part about it was I was I have no recollection, right? I had to go back and piece all this stuff together. So I'm not going to complain too much because it could have been a lot worse. There's like 3 people on earth who even knew where I was. I was so far out in the woods. Luckily, one of those people was 15 minutes away at work, and my wife was able to call him. And my wife knew something was wrong, Mason, whenever I called her. And I said, "What are you doing?" And it's on a Wednesday. I clearly know what she's doing on a Wednesday. She was at work. Um, she says, "I'm at work." "What do you mean?" I said, "Okay, well, where do you work?" And she was like, "What? Like, what are you talking about?" And she said, "Did something happen?" I said, "I think I fell." I was so out of it. I had no idea what had even happened. Had no idea I had broken bones. I'm walking through the woods. She says, "All right, I got to call some help." And the search party came and found me out there wandering around in the woods aimlessly. Um, Not even really much worried about what had happened. I was trying to hide my guns in my truck before I went to the hospital and things that didn't even matter. You just never know when disaster is going to strike. And luckily, I didn't break my neck. Because it really would have had to send a search party out for me to find me on that one. But hey, I'm here. I'm ready to talk some college football. I'm in one piece. I'm thankful for that. I'm going to get better eventually, but not going to stop us from talking some college football. So let's jump into that. But before we do, what have you been up to, man? You've been, I know you've been busy, but what you been up to?
Yeah, I'm never not busy. That's the thing. So I'm in sales for those who don't know on the civilian side, I should say, which is kind of weird. But outside of the
Yeah.
podcast, I'm in sales, so it never stops. Um, and yeah, it's a new year, new quota to hit. So that's always fun. And then outside of that, I'm also in school. I'm in the military, in the National Guard, Army, and so being in the military, one of the great things about it is you get pretty much free tuition. And so I'm taking advantage of that. Went back to school. I've got about a year and a half left. So I've been busy with schoolwork, been busy trying to keep up with what's going on in college football. Obviously, with my day job, I had drill last weekend. So, guys, it never stops for me. I've always got something that I either should be doing or am doing, and those two are not always the same thing. So that I do have fun outside of all of those things, believe it or not. Um, but but yeah, I think right now, and maybe you guys watching at home can relate to this, but it seems to me like a lot of people have and naturally this happens every year, right? This happened last year as well. But a lot of people have shifted their focus to from college football and now to I think if you're at least interested in the
Doge.
political side of things, yeah, you're looking at what's going on at Capitol Hill, and all throughout the country and really in the world, and the international affairs and whatnot. So I'm trying to get back in and get caught up, stay on the sort of cutting edge and the nuances of college football, and that's what we're going to talk about here today: is what's going on in college football, who are the hot teams, and we're also going to dive into who we think could potentially be in the playoffs next year. I think
Yeah.
last year, not at this time, but towards the beginning of the year last year, we looked at our top 12 and I feel pretty proud to say we hit 6 out of 12 of them, right? 6 out of 12 teams who made the playoffs. So we're gonna look a little bit earlier than last year at the top 12. We're actually gonna pull up. It's actually Dennis Dodd's top 12, and take a look at that. See what we. It's actually a top 25, but we'll look at the top 12 teams and maybe some teams that we think should be in it. But just to get an idea of what is coming next year, I think that's it's never too early to look at stuff like that. But we'll develop our own top 12 probably after spring ball. I think would be our first one. Get an
Mm-hmm.
idea of what the roster is going to look like, and after we do our previews, we'll break down our top 12 and give you guys a fair assessment there. But hey, man, ready to talk about it. And where do you want to start? Floor's
Yeah,
yours.
everything that you had just kind of said, that was kind of something that I was thinking about before the show started today. And something we talked about on the phone. Everybody's concentrated on everything that's going on, the crazy, all the government stuff, all that. Let's take a break for a minute. Let's take a break from thinking about all that stuff because I'm with you guys. That's what I'm thinking about like 24/7 right now, just about. But today I wanted to carve out some time to talk some college football. So let's jump into it. I want to start off with LSU, Mason, because um, I mean I think it warrants the question: what's going on with the Tigers and BK? Coming off of a 9-4 season, 5-3 in the SEC, get the win in the bowl game, the Texas Bowl over the Baylor Bears. Um, I think it was kind of a ho hum year in 2024, and the defense was to blame for the most part. I mean, there was a stretch where the offense didn't do so well. You had so many weapons out wide that you thought Garrett Nussmeier was going to be able to have a little bit more success through that middle stretch of the season, but I think he was cutting his teeth, man. This guy's a gunslinger. He's going to sling it into traffic every once in a while. And he hit a little stretch there where it was a bit of a lull, and the team really struggled, right? Because this was an offensive minded football team. If they weren't scoring 40 something points, they weren't going to win. I mean, against Baylor. They gave up 31 points there in the bowl game. And, I know it's a bowl game and all, and there's players that sit out and all that good stuff. That's great. I get it. But Baylor deals with the same thing that LSU deals with players sitting out, right? So it's not something exclusive to LSU. And in that game, they got to score, over 30 points to win. And that was kind of the mantra for this team in 2024. The defense was just lacking, and it was extremely inconsistent. Um, but all in all, eh, over so far in Brian Kelly's LSU stint, you got to be pretty happy. But I think everything kind of points to the 2025 season, and that's why we wanted to kind of talk about them today. I think they're a playoff bubble team, Mason, with Garrett
Mhm.
Nussmeier making his way back, this season. We'll kind of talk more about that here in a second. We're going to pull up the 2025 schedule and kind of go through some of the games and things like that. But there's some drama going on, man, and so I want to kind of talk about it. And look, this is a negative topic, and these premier programs, LSU is definitely one of those. Georgia, Ohio State, we've seen a lot of, issues, snafus, if you will, so far in the offseason with a coach, dealing with whatever that was at Ohio State. This stuff happens, is my point. The only way to keep this stuff, and we're going to talk about what that stuff is if y'all don't know. Let's kind of unpack that, and we'll kind of continue to talk about this. But Greg Brooks was a guy that played for LSU back in 2023. He was named a captain for the 2023 season, and then right as the 2023 season began, he had some issues at practice where he felt and the staff felt as though he incurred, I guess, vertigo is what they called it originally. He was throwing up at practice, had some issues, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I'm not a doctor, so I'm not going to sit here and explain vertigo to you, but that was what was originally said was his issue. And then lo and behold, it turns out after I forget how many days, 39 days or something like that, they finally send him to a neurologist and figure out he's got brain cancer. Right? He's got a tumor in the brain, and that's terrible. I mean, that's just absolutely awful. Well, fast forward 16 months, 17 months, whatever it was, and 6 days ago, you've got Greg Brooks Sr., Brooks Jr. going on Good Morning America, right? And basically saying that Brian Kelly is MIA as far as Greg Brooks is concerned. Hasn't called him, hasn't checked on him, hasn't done any of these things, and then it has apparently upset Greg Brooks Sr. Um, um, I'll read some of the quotes, and you can see them here on your screen. Greg Brooks Sr. Said of LSU's head football coach, "My son almost lost his life. Coach, where are you? Forget about football. Pick up the phone and say you love the kid, man." And that was his main complaint against Brian Kelly. Now the lawsuit comes in where they're suing, I guess, the medical staff there at LSU, and they're suing the hospital. And forgive me, I forgot the name, but it's the local hospital there, very very close to the university, and does all of their surgeries and things like that. Um, so let's read a quote here from Greg Brooks Jr. "I just want young athletes in the same spot I was. If something is hurting, tell them," Brooks Jr. said in an interview with Good Morning America, referring to coaches and school officials. "And if they don't do anything about it, go get your second opinion, because if I would have known that, I wouldn't be the way I am right now." And so there's where the lawsuit comes in. He's saying that there was gross negligence on the part of the LSU staff. Now, again, I just want to say, I mean, this is terrible, right? This is absolutely terrible stuff. Um, Brian Kelly comes out about 2-3 days ago at the time of this recording, and basically, and you can read the top part here, and it's a lot of, I won't say coach speak. I'm not saying it's insincere. I don't know. It's just it's something that's you would expect the top the majority of this quote, but the end here is where, it. Look, this is what I was thinking about, Mason. I read this quote from Brian Kelly, and I literally thought to myself, he did what I do with my wife when I'm in an argument with my wife. I say everything really logical, nice and explained out. I say it in the nicest way possible, and then at the very end, I just have to get in that. Mm. And that's where Brian
Twist the
Kelly
knife
messed
a
up
little
here,
bit.
man. Do what?
Mm-hmm. So just twist the knife a little bit.
Well, yeah, it's just like, final little poke in the ribs. He says, you can question me as a football coach. You can question me in terms of things that we do on the field. But off the field, as a parent, as a husband, as somebody that is actively involved in every community that I've been involved with, this is where the line is drawn with me. And that I don't think any of that really needed to be said necessarily. But I digress. It's not something that's going to teeter this lawsuit or anything like that. Well, the lawyers are going to do what they're going to do. The investigation's going to go the way it goes, and they're going to get to the bottom of if there was negligence or not. There's a group of people on the internet that feel like Greg Brooks Sr. is out there looking for the money. And look, guys, I don't know, you know, yeah, he is. Is it for a good reason? It seems like it. There's probably going to be a settlement here. I doubt this thing ever even makes it to court. I mean, the hospitals obviously have the best lawyers in the game. So, with all this being said, Mason, this is a lot of negative. And what I was
Mm-hmm.
going to say just a couple of minutes ago was all this negative stuff can be overlooked by a really, maybe it's sad to say this, but it can be overlooked by winning in 2025. If Brian Kelly was in the playoffs this past season or even won a playoff game, and the things would be a little bit different. They just would. We've watched Kirby Smart at Georgia deal with stuff, but he goes out and he wins and goes to the playoff a lot, and he wins SEC championships and things like that. And so these things are kind of thrown into the back seat. What are your thoughts on Brian Kelly? And we're going to talk more here in just a second about the good things that are going on for LSU, because there are a lot of good things going on for the football program as far as talent acquisition and things like that. Still some holes in the roster. We're going to talk about that here in a second. We'll look at the schedule. But what are your thoughts on Brian Kelly so far, at LSU? This past year was his third season. And what do you think, about this situation, I guess, in general, and the shadow that it casts on the LSU Tigers?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's incredibly difficult to imagine what Brooks is going through. Um, and his dad, if the allegations are true that LSU completely abandoned this kid for 16 months and they had to go hire an attorney to get any sort of recognition from the university and from the program, that's incredibly sad. It seems like Brian Kelly is saying that that was not true. I don't know why the allegations would come up if that wasn't true. Maybe they feel like the program, the university didn't do enough to help in this situation. But from what it looks like, Greg Brooks is having to go through a ton of rehabilitation to get his motor skills back, to learn how to speak and walk and do all these things over again. It's a long rehab process through the brain surgery and whatnot. And I'm not a doctor. I can't speak to when he'll be or if he'll be 100% again, but he's permanently disabled to some degree, and that's really tough for any young kid to go through. And as far as we know, this was not a football related brain cancer, right? So it's not like this is anything that LSU should take responsibility for, or college football as a sport should take responsibility for. It's just a rare brain cancer that unfortunately happened to this young kid. Now, Greg Brooks also played 3 seasons at Arkansas. Played, I think it was like 48 games at Arkansas and only two at LSU. So a lot of his tenure was from the Arkansas, from his stint at Arkansas, and so he probably had more relationships and things like that with that coaching staff, with those players. Probably got a call from Sam Pittman at some point. I have a hard time believing that when he transferred to LSU, he just meshed right right in with that team, and was everybody's favorite player and all that. So I think it would have been easy for a coaching staff to maybe not show as much attention to him as they would, let's say, if this happened to Garrett Nussmeier, right? The entire community would be more around that individual player as opposed to a transfer in who they saw for a couple of games, never really got to know the guy. And then he goes out with brain cancer. Not saying that makes it right at all to just neglect the kid, but you see where I'm getting at. If he had stayed at Arkansas, I don't think that he would have gotten a similar treatment at Arkansas that he got at LSU because he was kind of the new kid there. Nobody really knew him. He didn't establish himself as a player.
And Brian
I
Kelly
say
was
all
still
that
relatively new as well. I mean,
exactly. Yeah.
you know, Brian Kelly certainly didn't have a very, very close relationship with Greg Brooks. I'm almost positive. So,
Right.
yeah, I agree with you for sure.
But you would hope that uh, an occasional phone call would happen, just to say, hey, just checking on you. Um, you would think that someone from the university would be there every step of the way, helping out in any way that they can. If that didn't happen, I think it's personally sad, but professionally, I don't really. I mean, it sounds heartless, but I don't know that Brian Kelly has any sort of obligation to sit there and hold his hand throughout everything. Um, I don't know. I'm kind of torn on it. I don't think it should
And
affect
BK
the
also,
season.
Mason, says that there was a staffer there with him, in contact with him every week throughout this process,
Right.
but it wasn't Brian Kelly. And
Yeah.
that's where Greg Brooks Sr. has got the beef, you know. It wasn't BK himself checking on his son. And, you know, this is going to
Yeah.
be a situation, that's going to be a little messy here in the end. There's just, I mean, it already is. It already is.
Yeah. It's a bad look on Brian Kelly. It's a bad look on LSU for future recruits looking at the program, wondering how he connects with players. I've never thought of Brian Kelly as a huge players coach, right? I don't
Yeah.
think he's somebody who just connects in a way that Dan Lanning would, or in a way that even a Ryan Day might. Um, that's just not Brian Kelly. I think he's more of a CEO type. And you put him in a situation like this, and yeah, he would probably be the most awkward of head coaches that I could count or list by name. Um, However, if this were Sam Pittman, I think you would have gotten a completely different side. And uh, I hate it for the young man because he left Arkansas to go to LSU. Had he stayed at Arkansas, I think the treatment would have been completely different for reasons because I think Sam Pittman's just a more personable guy, and also because, like I said before, he would have had the team around him and the relationships around him that could have really made a difference in his rehab and whatnot.
Yeah. Well, with all that being said, I do think that there's a lot of positive going on at LSU right now, and that's why we wanted to talk about them today. Because I mean, at 9-4 last year, that's not a terrible season anyway. I mean, there's a lot of programs that would kill to win 9 games, right? Just a ton of them, and LSU, I think, has got a pretty good chance. If they can shore up the defense, of making a push for the playoff. I'm not sure that they can make the 12. They can make it, but I'm not sure that they will, I guess, is a better way to phrase that. But looking at some of the stuff that's going on there, in a positive note, the transfer portal is just bumping for LSU, and they're number one in the country, as you can see on your screen there. 10 4-star commitments, 5 3-star commitments there, puts them at number one over Ole Miss, the transfer portal king, and Lane Kiffin. So, I mean, there is some good going on. I just kind of looking at some of those guys that you've got coming in. I still have some questions, and I'm not gonna hold back on that. I mean, the defensive line is still an issue for LSU, and not only is it still an issue, but the issue hasn't really been addressed. So, if you look at the LSU transfer, um, the transfer portal class that they've put together. Um, it seems like the secondary was a big point of contention, right? They needed to, and they did. Every part of this defense, I think, minus maybe your starting guys there on the linebacker core. There was obviously some real. You got Whit Weeks making his way back. He kind of put America on notice last year with 117 tackles and a good piece there in the middle, right? Um, the secondary and the very back of the defense and the very front of the defense was what was so poor. And LSU is still hasn't they still haven't addressed this defensive line issue, Mason. And not only did they not address it, they've got players, that have left. Right? Jalen Lee, I think is his name. He transfers out there at kind of the 11th hour of the transfer portal class. So a lot of my concerns for LSU that I had going into last season, we both had. We talked about it at nauseum. Really, a lot of those problems still exist, at least on that defensive line. Are they going to be better in the secondary? I sure hope so. I think they will. I sure hope so. Blake Baker, I think I've got faith in the guy. I do. But we're going to have to see them hit right on a lot of these defensive players that came through the transfer portal. One of which, and look, let me clarify too. The defensive line, the edges are not bad, and the edges weren't really terrible last year. And I think you improved those even more this season with bringing in Patrick Payton over from Florida State. I mean, that's a nice piece there on the edge. It's the middle of that defensive line, man. It's a problem. And I'm sitting here, excuse me, I'm sitting here going through these transfers, and you got another edge player in Jack Pyburn coming over from Florida. Excuse me, guys. I'm sorry. I'm burping over here, but I just don't see those defensive linemen, man. You got JBR Suggs coming up, or he left. Okay, he's another one that left. Jalen Lee left with him. I just don't see it, man. So Brian Kelly still is struggling to address those issues. There is clearly a talent acquisition issue on the defensive line. This is the second year in a row we've watched LSU sit on their hands in the transfer portal and not go get a defensive lineman. I don't know what's up with that, man. I don't know what's going on with that, but they can't seem to get one. What are your thoughts there? And what do you think about the portal class? I mean, there's a lot of good in here. Don't get me wrong. I mean, LSU gets another great wide receiver, Nick Anderson. I mean, beautiful. That's an awesome thing. You think the Georgia Bulldogs wouldn't kill to have a Nick Anderson, right? I mean, there's other teams that would just die to have some of the talented skilled position players that LSU has got. But it seems like this team is still missing a little bit of that core, right? The core strength that you need to compete in the SEC all year and eventually go to SEC championship and the playoff and things like that. There still seems to be some holes, specifically defensively.
Yeah, I agree. And if you look at who LSU lost, I mean, it wasn't much, but you mentioned the defensive line. Yeah, they lost Jalen Lee. They also lost Deshaun Womack. I think that was a big loss for them coming off the edge there. And that's one that you probably would have liked to have had. Probably didn't live up to his potential as a high school recruit, but he's a guy you would like back on a defense as a whole that underperformed last season once again, but also a defensive line in particular as a group that underperformed. And outside of him, I think losing C.J. Daniels is probably the only other player that I say, yeah, I'm sure that they would have liked to have kept him. But you look at what they brought in, and they got some pieces on the defensive side of the football. I think you mentioned Patrick Payton. Let's see if he can return back to kind of what he was as a high school recruit at 6'5", 235. A lot of length, a lot of speed there, but had sort of underperformed like everybody did at Florida State. I'm wondering if a new environment sort of brings him back to sort of an NFL future type of edge player, which he certainly could be. And then Sadir Mitchell, similarly, but at Texas, kind of underperformed as an interior defensive lineman. He's at 6'6", 320. but came in as a 4-star recruit, and at least On Three has him as a 3-star transfer coming over from Texas. We'll see if he can kind of get back to prominence there and plug up some holes there for LSU. And then I really like Nick Anderson. I mean, I think he's going to be a great player coming over from OU if he can stay healthy. That was obviously a bit of an issue for the Sooners across the board for their wide receivers, but let's see what he does there. So LSU number one according to 24/7 at least number one transfer portal class overall. Um, that really stems from them losing out on Walter Nolan last year to Ole Miss, and if you recall last year, Brian Kelly threw a little bit of a fit when they lost Walter Nolan. Thought they had him. Seemed like he was coming. I believe it was Nolan. I know it was an interior defensive lineman, but I'm pretty sure it was Nolan. Anyways, he basically told all the boosters like, yeah, we lost this guy due to money, and I'm sick and tired of it. And what happens the year after that? Seems like they put their money where their mouth is, and were able to pull together a pretty good transfer class. Maybe that's what happened. I think that I don't think that should go overlooked though. When you talk about how these boosters react to the team and what's going on, what the head coach says, it seems like they definitely pulled together some money, spent in the transfer portal, and then also spent in the recruiting class. I mean,
Yeah.
according to On Three,
It,
LSU ended up ninth in recruiting as well, and that's a top 10 is probably where LSU is sort of going to hover, but
I think you're
a pretty
breaking up a
strong
little bit
class
there,
overall.
Mason. There you are.
Okay.
I'm sorry. You had broke up there for just a minute, but we caught some of that. But I mean, here's my thing. It seems like LSU last year they were nowhere near the top 10 in the transfer portal class. Okay, this is a new
Hmm.
thing for LSU. Okay, they're not, and I'm not saying they haven't got good transfer players. That would be foolish. I mean, they had they had two of them win Heisman's. Okay, so I'm not saying it's a new thing for transfers to go there, but number one in the country in the transfer portal class is a whole lot different than going in filling some holes. I feel like LSU's
Yeah.
approach to the transfer portal class this year was more like throw it up against the wall and see what sticks. Anybody who wants to come to LSU, best available players, come on. And I think I think that it was kind of reflected in the fact that the defensive line is still, the cupboard is still fairly empty. Um, like somebody like Jalen Lee, are you heartbroken about him leaving? No, but you need depth. You got to have
Yeah.
depth, and he does have experience. So you don't want guys like that walking out the door. I love, and Barry and Brown was one that you may have mentioned. Maybe I missed it there, but another wide receiver that comes over, a guy with a big personality, right, just like Nick Anderson does. LSU has got those bad boy wide receivers. I mean, that's just the way it is. And they got a gunslinger quarterback in Garrett Nussmeier who decided to come back this year, and we'll see what all of that stuff, how that helps the team. The offense, the numbers were pretty good last year, and as far as on a national scale, I expect them to be that way again with Joe Sloan at the offensive coordinator position again, his second year right after Den Brock leaves. So I expect the play calling to get a little bit better. I expect Garrett Nussmeier to get a little bit better. I think the wide receiver room is very similar to what it was last year with the talented guys you had last year with Kyron Lacey and others. And not to mention Aaron Anderson is back. So you've got weapons at the skill positions. You got some young running backs. I feel good about all that stuff. And everybody knows how good the offensive line was for LSU last year. Now you're going to lose some of those guys. That's going to be tough to replace. But, I think they've got some dudes. We'll see how they respond. I don't know the first round NFL talents like some of the guys they had last year, but um, it's the defense, man. And
Yeah.
we saw improvement last year. We monitored it here on this channel throughout the season, and there was improvement, and then there was games where it's like the defense kind of took the day off, right? And so we'll see if there's some more consistency there. There's some of your top transfer portal players there in that slide. I should have flipped over to that earlier, but You can always pause it and look at it, guys, or look it up on 24/7 if you wanted to. Um, you know, wide receivers and secondary and edge players is like the majority of what they went after. And I think those were just some of the best available players, and that's what LSU took here. And they were able to get the number one transfer class in the country. And by the way, 2025, they've got the 10th best recruiting class. Yeah, 2 5 stars, 19 4 stars, had a few 3 stars as well. So you put all that together, and I think you've got a very talented roster. There's no doubt about that. But as far as 10th in the country, as far as recruiting, I mean, we all know what that means in the SEC, though, right, Mason? I mean, that's going to
Yeah,
put you probably seventh, sixth or seventh, in the
yeah.
SEC as far as recruiting goes. So 10th is good. It's not great, right? Especially if you were an ACC team or you were a Big 12 team, it would be great. It would be considered a great class. But at LSU and in the SEC, I would give that like a B grade, for LSU as far as the high school recruiting goes. Um, let's talk about the
Well,
schedule
and
here for a
and
minute.
hold on.
Go
More
ahead.
more importantly, on the high school recruiting, just looking at the recruits that they brought in, we mentioned that they really needed to focus on defensive line. Well, they didn't really address that in the high school ranks at least. Four of
Yeah.
their bottom five recruits were defensive linemen, and they didn't sign any above that. So all 3 stars that are coming in, not to say that they can't be future five, or future first round picks or anything like that, but um, they didn't really go out and get a big name. And I know that they exist in the state of Louisiana, but they didn't get any defensive linemen out of the state of Louisiana. So maybe a down year for the state. I'm not that deep in the weeds when it comes to recruiting, but just looking at it on paper, they did not address the defensive line in the high school rankings like they did other areas. Like you
Yeah.
mentioned running back. Got a 5 star running back and a high 4 star running back coming in. I think DJ Pickett at cornerback is probably a guy that you expect to play um, in some sort of capacity this year.
Hmm.
A true 5 star bona fide guy, but I just think it's important to point out that they really did not address the defensive line like I think that they probably should have. Should have been able to throw a good bit of money at this class, and it doesn't seem like they did that.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Look, they don't have time to sit here and figure it out either, Mason. Looking at this schedule, I pulled it up earlier and was kind of digging through this thing, and all these opponents that I'm about to name, and you see it on your screen, but these are all within the first 6 games of the season, Mason. You got Clemson, Florida, who Florida is going to be better in 25. I don't think there's any doubt about that with DJ Lagway. Then you got to go, or excuse me, it's at Clemson to start the year, okay? And then you've got Florida at home, which is in week 3, or at least the third game of the year. That might be week 4 or something like that. I don't have the dates, but you've got Florida at Ole Miss, and then South Carolina. And those are all within the first 6 games of the year. Kind of following up those, you've got at Vandy, Texas A&M, at Alabama, Arkansas, Western Kentucky, at Oklahoma, who I would think would be better this year with John Mateer coming in at quarterback. But that offense was so bad last year for Oklahoma. It's hard to sit there and put your money on the Sooners having a heck of an offense. But it's at Oklahoma though. At the end of the year, we just saw what Alabama did at the end of the season, going to Norman and absolutely just crap down the back of their leg. So there is certainly a possibility that you run into Oklahoma and you're going to play a really good defense that day. We'll see what the offense looks like by that point in the season. But this is not an easy schedule, brother, and there is no easy schedules in the SEC. But again, LSU starts the season off out of conference, and this time it's going to be on the road. So
Hmm.
we know the history. I mean, the last, what is it, 3-4 years, LSU can't win the first game of the year. And I think it is so important that LSU figures out a way to win that game early in the season, Mason, because it's going to create a lot of momentum if they can do it. We've seen this happen with the Georgia Bulldogs. Georgia and Kirby love playing a big game to start the year because if you win that sucker, you've got momentum. And that's a
Hmm.
big deal to get the team kicked off in the right direction early, early, early. LSU hasn't been able to do that, and it has cost them over the last few years. So with the schedule, I mean, this is going to be a really, really tough one. Luckily, there's 12 teams in the playoff these days. A 10-2 season here would be huge, would be absolutely huge, and would almost certainly put you in the college football playoff, as we've seen this past season, the first year with the 12 team. Barring some kind of crazy scenario where you've got multiple way ties, 10-2 is it's got to be the target for Brian Kelly and the LSU Tigers in 25. What do you think about the schedule, man?
Yeah, it's a tough schedule. You replace USC with Clemson, then of course you have all the same SEC opponents from last year. Wasn't a great year last year. I do expect LSU to be better this year. Just kind of broadly looking at it, we'll go into a deep dive closer to the season, y'all. When we do a preview of LSU, which should probably drop, I would think, in July at some point. We will go game by game and give you a win-loss record prediction for the Tigers. But I think, yeah, broadly speaking, I think 10-2 is probably the ceiling here, which would probably put them in the college football playoff in a 12-team era. But I think 8-4 is very realistic too. It's very possible. You know, looking at the schedule, they could very easily lose to Clemson to start the year. We don't know what Florida's going to be. I have a feeling they're going to be much better. Like you said, that could be a loss. Ole Miss could definitely be a loss. I think Austin Simmons is going to be great at quarterback for the Rebels. And then obviously, Lenore Sellers and South Carolina. You're talking about facing between Sellers, Simmons, Lagway, and Cade Klubnik for Clemson, four of what I would probably have in at least in my top 15 quarterbacks for the entire country, if not top 10.
Good point.
We have to wait and see out of what we get out of Austin Simmons, but I would venture to guess that by the end of the year we're talking about Austin Simmons as a top 15 quarterback in the country. I feel pretty good about Muck Vick over there playing for the Rebels, excuse me. Um, and then you still have the rest of the schedule to deal with. I think that those four out of the first six games of the season on that schedule, it's gonna be really tough for them to navigate. And if they can get through that with one loss, yeah, this is a playoff team in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to dive more into LSU as the offseason rolls on. There will be tons of news. We're going to keep you up to date on that the very best we can. Can't wait to talk more LSU. And like you said, we'll be doing our deep dive there in June, July, all that stuff after we watch the spring games and we can really, really put together the rosters after the spring portal. So if you're an LSU fan, welcome to the First and Long College Football Show. Come and hang out with us. We've got Power 4 college football coverage, wall to wall. Love to have you come and join our little community we've got going. All right, Mason, let's transition over to our 2024 national champions. I guess do they call it 2024 or 20? That's always confusing because the games played in 25. They were the national champions of the 2024 season, the Ohio State Buckeyes, nonetheless. Where do you go from here, right? That's kind of, I think, where a lot of people's heads are at with Ohio State, as a lot of these pieces that won this national championship are gone. They have hit the road. So let's kind of dive into it. Jim Knowles, Chip Kelly, and Will Howard, all three of those guys, and I would consider all three of them to have a large percentage of the credit, right, for winning a national championship. Obviously, football is a team sport, but I mean, those guys were very, very important to the success of the Buckeyes in this past season. They're all gone. They're all gone. Jim Knowles, surprisingly, moves on to Penn State, takes a lateral move. And from what I understand, I guess he has some connections with Penn State. I don't, but the point is, that was a big loss for Ohio State. And to lose somebody like Jim Knowles to a lateral move like that, I mean, that's kind of a shot in the leg, man. That really, really, that hurts. And you and I have been huge advocates of Jim Knowles over the last few seasons, or the last 3 seasons particularly, where I mean he transformed that defense. We were 3 years ago talking about Ohio State, how they're soft as Charmin. You know, it's a finesse football team that's got really good skill position players, but not very tough, right? And Jim Knowles, in my opinion, completely revamped that whole thought process and preconceived notion of the Ohio State Buckeyes. And they were a tough nosed football team. You cannot find a game this past season that the defense didn't play well. You can't find one. I mean, they were very consistent, and what I would definitely, un, unarguably, top three in the country defensively. So this is a huge loss. This is a huge loss, and how I know it's a huge loss is I'm sitting here looking at the candidates, Mason, that they're wanting to use to, replace Jim Knowles, and there's no guy on this list that just really jumps out to me and says, Ohio State's got to go get that guy right now. And I'll read some of them out to you now. One of them is Bryant Haynes, who's the defensive coordinator over at Indiana. And immediately when Jim Knowles left, Bryant Haynes received an extension at Indiana. More money, extension, all that good stuff. It's almost like Indiana knew what was coming because they did.
Right.
Right. So they extend him, and I'm not saying that Ohio State doesn't have the money or the draw to be able to draw somebody like Bryant Haynes. I don't know him very super well as far as like being, his coaching career and what his ties are, but he's got ties today somehow, and there's some type of yarn string from picture to picture on the map. You know what I'm saying? I don't know what their connection is, but they do have some type of connection. So I feel like that would be that's an up and coming guy, right? I feel like that's a decent replacement. But the rest of these guys, Joe Cullen, the D line coach with the Chiefs, there's no guarantee that a guy like Joe Cullen, who's in the NFL right now, is going to be able to come over and recruit and do all the things necessary as a college football defensive coordinator. You know what I'm saying? Like that is a hectic ass lifestyle being a college football coach. So I'm not sure these guys want it, but um, there's some options from within the current safeties coach Matt Guerrieri, the current secondary coach Tim Walton, and Mason. Honestly, that's kind of where I'm leaning at this point because I don't see any outside hire. I don't see Mister Outside Hire that you're like, man, I would love for him to run our defense. Gosh, so Ohio State's in kind of a tough situation here, man. They might have to take a flyer on somebody that's already on the staff to try to hold on to the players that they got, right? Because there is another transfer portal coming open, and they've got some defensive players that even if they don't go do spring practice with another team, they're so damn good. Any team would love to have them and would love to play them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's still that risk, and you've got to figure out a way to mitigate that risk if you're the Ryan Day of trying to figure out how do you replace Jim Knowles without losing some of these players. Caleb Downs was very upset about Jim Knowles leaving. Went to social media immediately, and expressed his discernment for that. So, what are your thoughts, man? I mean, Jim Knowles was a big piece of this thing. We watched Georgia. Georgia did this on the opposite end of this, Mason. We remember Todd Monken. Everybody remembers Todd Monken being the offensive coordinator at Georgia. He wins 2 back-to-back national championships, and then he's gone, right? And
Yeah.
Georgia really hasn't recovered since then, Mason. I mean, offensively, let's just be honest. Um, those guys are not a dime a dozen, man. They are hard to find. Jim Knowles was one of those guys on the defensive end. What are your thoughts? Where does Ohio State go from here?
Well, the good thing is the important pieces of the football team are still intact, and that's the players, right? They still have players. They're still recruiting at a top 3 level year in and year out. Just finished, I think, with the number 1 class. Or no, that was Texas. But another top 5 class for Ohio State nonetheless.
Yeah.
They got Julian Sayin over to transfer from Alabama. He looks to be the starting quarterback. Got a 5-star quarterback in behind him. By the way, I think that what is it, Lincoln Kindholtz? I think he's a very promising player. He'll be in his third year at quarterback for the program, as well as a fine backup for Julian Sayin, more than likely. And then you look at the receivers that they have on offense. And I think, we didn't talk much about the Brian Hartline promotion to offensive coordinator, but when you have those sort of weapons
We're
on the
about to get
offensive
there.
side of the football, it makes it so much easier. Now, I am concerned about Brian Hartline because we saw some of the we got a glimpse of what he did in 2023, and he was kind of shadowing Ryan Day. If if that's my reading on the situation, at least for 2023, is that he sort of shadowed what was going on there. Sorry, Mark. There's a tapping or something going on. Is that coming on from your end?
I don't think so.
Okay, it just went away, whatever it was. Sorry about that, y'all. Anyways, I think that Brian Hartline could be a great offensive coordinator. I know a lot of the Ohio State fans are excited to see Hartline get this opportunity. He's been a hell of a recruiter from the wide receiving room standpoint. So, what is he going to look like as an OC? We'll have to wait and see. I think that that was sort of an experiment that never fully came to fruition in 2023 as he was the co-offensive coordinator. I'm anxious to see what he does, but when you have these sorts of weapons around you as an offensive coordinator, I think it only helps. It seems like I think the Buckeyes did find an offensive line coach, Coach Brown, if I'm not mistaken, comes in, and he comes over from Virginia Tech. Anxious to see what he does. Gotta figure some stuff out on the offensive line once again. They've got two transfers coming in on the offensive line, both at offensive tackle, and Philip Daniels, who comes over from Rice. He figures to be a starter, believe it or not. And then Ethan Onionwa was the player who came over from Rice. And then Philip Daniels is another transfer that's coming in, and he comes over from Minnesota. And a fine Minnesota offense, and I don't know much about their offensive line, but we'll have to wait and see. Nonetheless, bringing in two transfers to play the offensive line is always a scary situation. Top that off, you've got a new offense coordinator and a new offensive line. It's a little bit worrisome. On the defensive side of the football, I mean, Jim Knowles was one of one in my opinion. I think that he is probably top three defensive play caller in college football. It's really kind of tough to judge the play callers on the defensive side of the football because I think more so than the offensive side, the defense is more about players than plays in a lot of ways. And this defense that Jim Knowles had for 3 years that he was in that position was really really good. And last year was the cream of the crop for the past 3 years. They're going to lose 8 players on the defensive side of the football, 8 starters on the defensive side of the football. Really tough to replace that, but they didn't have to go out to the transfer portal to replace those guys, and I think that is important. You've got a lot of guys who have experience, and really in the middle of the defense with Sonny Styles. I think that him being back is huge for the defensive side of the football. Arvell Reese was a guy who got a lot of snaps, but he'll be replacing Cody Simon. I think that those two in the middle of your defense is going to make a huge difference and a huge impact. And of course, Caleb Downs, best safety in college football, never hurts. Another year with Igbinosun also. I think that's really really going to help him out in his future as he projects to be an NFL player. But when you look at the defensive coordinator position, you got a lot of players, plus what they brought in the transfer portal and in the this upcoming recruiting class. A lot of players who figure to be big time Big Ten athletes, right? But who they go and get, man, I don't know. I think what we're waiting on is the Super Bowl, which is being played today as we're recording. If they're going to go out and get Tim Walton, and or excuse me, if they're going to go out and get Joe Colin, and
Yeah.
if they want to interview him, they're going to wait until after this game is played, right? I think that we'll know next week, but I I'm concerned about hiring from within, doing too much internal hiring and trying to just have the same offense and defense as you had last year. I think while it worked, it got you a national championship. You're not going to have the guys who called those plays calling those plays again, and I think that is that creates a difference, right? So maybe bringing in someone from outside with a different game plan, with a different logic on the defensive side of the football, could help out here and could possibly save the careers of an internal promotion for guys like Gat Gariri and Tim Walton. Um, do they go that route? I'm not sure, but I would think that if you're going to have an internal hire, then you could be setting things up for failure, really, for this team. And I'm really concerned about Ohio State as a whole this year with everything that they're losing. And Yeah, just kind of worried about where this team's going to go in 2025.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I didn't really touch on the Brian Hartline thing. I kind of told you what my thoughts were earlier today. I mean, it seemed like Brian Hartline, maybe that hire was more about retaining Brian Hartline.
Hmm.
Look, I'm just from the outside looking in. I don't have some kind of inside source that's telling me this. I'm just reading the tea leaves here the best I can. Brian Hartline seemed like a somewhat safe option, right? He's worked under the tutelage of Ryan Day for a long time. He's brought in the most talented players on this roster year after year. Everybody knows how good the wide receivers are at Ohio State. But being the wide receivers coach and being a talent acquisition expert like he is a whole lot different than calling the plays down in and down out. And so I'm interested to see, is Brian Hartline the man for the job, or was it more of a, all right, we've got to, we've got to stop, some damage control, right? That's what I'm interested to see. And I guess we're not going to know until after the season's over and we kind of see what happens. You talked about Julian Sayin on this offense. You got a brand new quarterback. It seemed to me if Brian Hartline was going to leave, that would have been the opportunity for him to leave. Ohio State shows up with the bag, and he's not going anywhere. So did good retaining somebody who has been a big part of the success at Ohio State over the last few years. I'm interested to see how it translates into the offensive play calling. Ryan Day has got to stay out of the play calling duties. We've talked
Hmm.
about it ad nauseum on this channel. You can't be a head coach and call the offensive plays. Yeah, at a big time school and try to win national championships. So, with that being said, Ryan Day has got to actually trust this guy to run the offense. Chip Kelly, I think it was very easy to trust him as he goes on to the Raiders, obviously. It was easy to trust him considering the fact that Ryan Day has worked for Chip Kelly before. Like, he's a senior, he's like an elder, a football elder in Ryan Day's eyes. And Brian Hartline is more of the young Padawan, right? So, how does he look at that? Is he butting in the middle of the game and say, "No, we're running it here"? I just don't think that that's healthy, and I don't know that that's necessarily a long play for Ohio State. We'll see how things work out. Looking at the schedule, start off the season with Texas doesn't get much harder than that, right? You're going to host Texas to start off the season, but at Washington is somewhat of a tough game, but we'll see. I mean, you go in September, the weather is typically pretty good at Washington in September. It's late in the season where you go there and you can run into some trouble with the cold and rain and things like that. Um, but at Illinois, Illinois is kind of one of those teams that you have a pop year once every 3 years. That's kind of what you hope as the coach of Illinois. And I feel like that pop year was kind of last year. Wisconsin, very disappointing this past season. Penn State's obviously going to be a tough game, but it seems Ohio State has their number. This year may be a little bit different, but it's going to be Jim Knowles against this Ohio State offense. That's going to be super interesting and must watch TV there on November 1st. And you finish up the season, Purdue, UCLA, Rutgers, and then, of course, the big game, and it's going to be at Michigan this season. Look, as an Ohio State, I watch a lot of Ohio State football, right? I mean, if you're a big college football fan, you probably do too. Um, there's a good chance here that Ohio State is able to go. I think 10-2. I think there's a pretty good opportunity for that in this season, and that's going to put you on the doorstep of the college football playoff. It's all going to depend on those two losses and who they're to, Mason, because this season has got this team has got a loss written all over them that they shouldn't lose, if that makes any sense. With all these new coaches and new players, Ohio State's going to lose a game they shouldn't lose this year. And it happens to most good teams. The great ones are the ones that are able to endure and figure out a way to win those things in the fourth quarter. You're missing some of those big time playmakers and coaches. Those moments, those clutch moments, are going to be what's so important for Ohio State. And who do you lean on? Who's the go-to guy? And who are you trusting? That's all stuff that we're going to have to kind of figure out as the season goes on and as spring goes on. Anything else on Ohio State before we move on, Mason? Because I've actually we're going to go top 12 and then we're going to get out of here because I got stuff I got to go do. But
Yep.
anything else on Ohio State?
No, I'm just again, I'm interested to see what these internal hires sort of look like. Um, I wonder how much them winning the national championship kind of hurt them when it comes to the coaching sort of carousel. They're kind of like the last ones on, and there's nobody there are no other seats for them to find, and just makes it a little bit tough on these teams. And I mean, woe is me, right? You won a national championship, you can't complain too much about what's left out there for you to go grab and gobble up. Um, but let's see what happens. You talk about an upset on the schedule, by the way. I'd be looking at Illinois as a team that could potentially upset Ohio State this year. We'll talk more about that as we inch our way towards the season. It'll be here before you know it.
Absolutely, no doubt about it. Again, thank y'all for tuning in. Those of you who have been tuning in and kind of, coming in and out, I appreciate you guys. If you could hit the like button for us, get the good word out about the First and Long College Football Show. We're in the. It feels like the dog days of summer here in Georgia. Man, it's hot outside. But
Not mad
we're
about it.
getting closer and closer to the summer, which means, guys, we're getting closer and closer to the fall. Be the most educated guy at the water cooler at work. Come hang out with us here on First and Long College Football Show. We'll make sure that you are that. All right, last topic of today, and we're going to call it for the live show. We're gonna go into a way too early top 12, right?
Yeah.
We're gonna look into what Dennis Dodd has to say about the college football landscape going into the next season, and just kind of give our thoughts, our way too early thoughts before these spring games on who we think deserves to be in that top 12 and who we think could rise into that top 12 and kind of surprise some people. Um, let's kind of go through some of these, Mason, and maybe you could just kind of take us through and we'll just talk about them as we go and as you scroll around. But
Hmm.
I see Texas there at number one, and Mason, honestly, I don't really understand that. Um, uh, look, you're higher on Arch Manning than I am, Mason. I mean, and we
Hmm.
figured that out this past season. I think you're a little bit higher. I'm not saying you predicted him to win the Heisman or something, which I know a lot of people probably will. Um, there is a lot of growth that I still need to see out of Arch Manning for him to be able to take Texas to the promised land, right? I've seen the guy. I love his legs. I love what he can do with his legs. Um, but I am very concerned about what he's going to do on a week in and week out basis when the football's in his hand. First of all, Texas's running game's got to get a whole heck of a lot better than what it was this past season. Arch is going to help with that some, but you've got to have some help in the backfield with Arch, and I think that's going to go a long, long way. Um, uh, take us through this. What do you think about Texas, and then just kind of take us through the list here.
Yeah, I don't mind Texas being right here at number one personally. You look at what they bring back, and I think it's a pretty loaded roster here. Ryan Wingo coming back at wide receiver. I think he's going to be a big part of the offense. You've got DeAndre Moore coming back. You bring in a true freshman in Khalid Lockett, who's gonna play at wide receiver, and those are all weapons that Arch Manning is going to be able to dish out the football to. And I think that's a pretty good little cast there around Arch Manning. Not to mention Trey Wisner, he's going to be back. Jarrett Gibson is going to be back at or at running back, and then also their starting running back C.J. Baxter, who was hurt for most of the year. Now, that being said, this offense is losing a ton. I'm going to go through some of the names here, but Jaden Blue's gone. Quinn Ewers obviously gone. Gunnar Helm, who was probably the best weapon, I think, for this offense. Was he the most productive? Probably not. But he seemed like a good little outlet for this offense for Quinn Ewers to throw the ball to, and he's going to be gone. Not a bad blocker either. The entire offensive line is gone. That is going to hurt for the most part, including a first round talent in Kelvin Banks. A day two guy in Cameron Williams and Jake Majors, and Hayden Connor. All those guys are gone. Silas Bolden's gone. Matthew Golden is gone. Isaiah Bond is gone. So I see on the offensive side of the football, I see a huge transition happening. I just think that Texas has done a good enough job recruiting that this is a reload type of team and not a rebuild type of team. Are they going to be perfect throughout this year? I don't think so. On the defensive side of the football too, I think bringing in Hero Kanu coming over from Ohio State is huge to play nose tackle, and they also got Cole Brevard to come in. They really just went out. They got three interior defensive linemen in the transfer portal that I think are all going to play.
Yep.
That was huge. Signing Justice Terry, the 5-star who they kind of stole from Georgia, so to speak. That was huge. That was huge for them. A defense that is losing a lot, but they do bring back Malik Muhammad. I think that's huge. Michael Taft is coming back. Anthony Hill, of course. Trey Moore. Maybe we see a little bit more of him. Ethan Burke. Maybe we see a little bit more of him. I think that there are enough pieces on this team as a whole to warrant Texas being number one. Are they the most proven team on this list? We'll have to wait and see. And maybe at the end, Mark, we'll just kind of give our number one team at least, and not our whole top 12, but just kind of what we think. All these rankings are based off of Dennis Dodd.
One thing to kind of just put a cherry on what you're talking about for Texas, they lose their safeties coach. He ends up going over to Georgia Tech and becomes the defensive coordinator there at Georgia Tech. And I think that was a great hire by Georgia Tech, and I think it was an inevitable loss for Texas to lose. That's what you want. You want these position coaches turning into defensive coordinators, and that's development of your coaches, and there's a lot of development going on this team as well. So I don't want to sound all down and dumpy about everything with Texas. That's not the case, but I do have questions for them. But they'll have to answer some questions on the back end of that defense where that was absolutely the strength of their entire team this past season was that secondary.
Yeah.
But I definitely agree with Texas being in the top 5. I just don't know about number 1. Yeah. I see Georgia there at number 2. The first line of that is the Dogs slumped badly last season with 3 losses. Look, we know what Georgia's going to be defensively. We just don't know what they're going to be offensively, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's pretty fair to say. We don't know if Gunnar Stockton is going to be the quarterback for Georgia next year, or if it's going to be a guy like Ryan Puglisi, who seems to be getting a lot of buzz right now.
Lots of Stockton hate, my friend. You know what?
I
don't know.
I think as Georgia fans, right? You guys who watch the show know we're Georgia fans. We're unapologetic about it. It seems like the backup quarterback always gets more attention than the starting quarterback, and I'm sure it's the same can be said about every team in college football. But all of a sudden, I'm getting texts about Ryan Puglisi and who's Ryan Puglisi and what is he going to do for Georgia, and Um, I think that this is going to be Gunnar Stockton's team until it's not, right? I think when you look at the schedule, week 3, I believe they have Tennessee, and that's a game where Gunnar Stockton's going to either sink or swim. And then coming up in their 4th game of the year, I don't know if it's week 4 or not, but they've got Alabama following up Tennessee. So in those after those 2 games, we'll know if it's Gunnar Stockton or not. Um, but I'm hearing some really good things about Ryan Puglisi as well. We'll have to wait and see. The weapons are around those quarterbacks, whoever is there, is going to be huge. There's a lot of turnover on the offensive line. I'm kind of concerned about that. But Georgia does go out and get Zachariah Branch. They do go out and get Noah Thomas and add some weapons there for the quarterback to throw to. I think if Nate Frazier can really be the bell cow running back for this offense, I think that would go a long way. And then defensively, they're losing a lot. Losing Malachi Starks, losing Jalen Walker, losing Michael Williams. Those are 3 probably first round draft picks, right? That are going to be gone. They do return Dalen Everett. I think him, when you throw Dalen Everett in conjunction with potentially a starter in Ellis Robinson, that could be a really good secondary. Obviously, you've got KJ Bolden playing safety, and I think the secondary will be fine. I'm still concerned about the defensive line for Georgia and how they're going to attack the run. That's been an issue the past couple of years, I think, by Georgia standards. So how do they get back to a team that can really stop the run and also stop the pass, which they've been good at for the past couple of years? Um, anxious to see what Georgia does, but having them at number 2, I think, is a little bit surprising to me, Mark. I mean, we're talking about the ranking after all. I think I would have Georgia in the top 5, but I don't know if I would have Georgia at number 2, just considering, uh, they're not bringing back a Carson Beck, and Carson Beck was the offense for this team last year. So how do we really figure Georgia's at 2? I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. Um, Anything else you want to add on Georgia, Mark?
Not really, man. I'm just, it's a wait and see for the offense, right? It was a bad year for the offense, and we all know that. And there was a lot that contributed to that. Um, injuries at running back didn't help. Lots of injuries on the offensive line. The wide receiver room, it was maligned by arrests, guys getting kicked off the team, injuries here and there that always happen. But um, it's a wait and see type situation. I'm not ready to sail Gunner Stockton down the creek. Okay. And for some reason, in most conversations I have, I feel like I'm the minority in that. And,
Yeah.
and I'll be honest with you, man. The only thing I really saw from Gunner Stockton that I didn't like whenever he played in the playoffs was holding the ball too long. And that is something that is that's very common for young players in college football, especially coming, from the high school ranks. He hadn't played much in college. He was holding the ball a little bit too long, and
Yeah.
we saw Carson Beck all year have trouble communicating with these wide receivers, and the wide receivers just never really helped him out. I felt like Gunnar Stockton was dealing with a lot of the same things. Um, well, he threw the ball on the wrong side of people's body a couple times, made it a little bit tougher. But a decent wide receiver core, I feel like, would have made some of those catches. So I'm just not ready to say that Gunnar Stockton is not the guy at Georgia. We all know he's tough as nails, and he's a Georgia Bulldog through and through. I'm real interested to see how things go in the spring, and I wouldn't be surprised to hear if Gunnar Stockton has a real good spring and ends up starting the season for the Bulldogs. And I'd like to see
Yeah.
it. I would like to see it. As far as the defense goes, you're right. There are a lot of players lost, but I mean, water wet, fire hot, Georgia defense good. How
Yep.
good are they? Are they going to be great? Are they going to be 2021? It's hard to know. I would think more. I would hope that this defense would be more like 2022. Because if everybody remembers 21, you lose all those great NFL players on the defense, and then everybody's like, "Oh, what is Georgia going to do?" They're going to go win another national championship and have another really good defense, is what they did that following year. So I am confident Kirby can reload on the defensive end. and can figure out ways by at least the second half of the season to figure out some of these spots. But it's gonna be a little bit rocky to start the season. Figuring out who's who, right? Because guys that show up in practice and guys that show up on game day are two different things. So we're gonna have to wait and see on some of that stuff. All right, let's cruise through some of these other teams real quick.
Yeah, so Miami at number three. Obviously, a lot of attention on Miami right now as they bring in Carson Beck. Um, I gotta wait and see on Miami because I would have had them. I think we had them in our top five or at least our top 10 going into last year, and they just kind of wet the bed. The defense was not what we wanted them to be or expected them to be, and that was a big reason for them not having success. I don't know that Carson Beck moves the needle for me because he's not a defensive player, and the defense was where Miami had all their issues, and I don't think that Carson Beck is Cam Ward. I don't think he's going to transform the offense and can really be the guy for the offense. We saw that experiment with Georgia last year. It didn't work out. Not to mention Miami doesn't have an Xavier Restrepo on their roster. So I don't know, man. I gotta see more out of this defense before I have them in the top five going into this year. Are they the favorites to win the ACC in my mind? Maybe. I still think Clemson's going to be pretty good. So and I still think SMU is growing as a program. So I don't know. I don't know about this one. I think Miami probably has a very expensive roster, and maybe that's the reason for them being projected so highly. But I still have a lot of questions about the Canes.
Yeah, well, they also play in the ACC and automatically gives them a chance, right? So, you know, is Miami going to be in the discussion? Well, they were in the discussion last year. Is Carson Beck Cam Ward? No, he's not. So there better be Carson is going to have to play in a complementary offense to be able to take Miami to where they want to go. So it's gonna. I don't have questions about Carson Beck. I really don't. For the most part in his career, he's been consistent. But is he a guy that you're going to be able to just put the game on his back like a Cam Ward and just say, "Hey, man, we need you to make a play"? I don't know if he's that guy. Right? We saw that this year.
Mm-hmm.
Georgia asked him to do that, and there was a lot of situations he couldn't. Now, the wide receiver core, we all know it was much maligned for Georgia, and with good reason. They dropped a lot of passes. So you're right, though. It's the defense. I think the Miami offense will be at least serviceable, if not serviceable plus, right? If not, maybe really good. But the defense was what was a big issue last year for sure. I see we got Ohio State there at number 4. I mean, we've already talked in depth about Ohio State today. Julian Sayin at quarterback is going to tell us a lot about, what is Julian Sayin, right? Um, what he's going to tell us about a lot about what this offense is going to be. Brian Hartline is the offensive coordinator this season. Still looking for a defensive coordinator. I don't think this is the year for Ohio State, personally. Okay. Do they have a top 5 roster in the country? You bet they do. And that's exactly why they're at the number 4 spot right now because of talent acquisition.
Yeah, and the thing I struggle with this ranking is having Ohio State as the number one Big Ten team in the ranking. I don't think that they're the number one Big Ten team. I would give that nod to Penn State right now, considering what they're bringing back, and couple that with the defensive coordinator that they stole from Ohio State. I think that Penn State should be higher on the totem pole as a team. I think they've got the best offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator in the Big Ten, and that really says a lot. I'm sure that they'll be on this list somewhere. But Ohio State just a lot more questions than answers right now, I think, and it's tough for me on February the 9th to really say that they're the number 4 team in the country or even have them in the top 5 right now. But as far as a roster goes, I completely agree. They are definitely a top 5 roster. And what do you know? Penn State, they're at number 5. We were just talking about you. Um, a lot coming back. I think the offense is going to be just as good, if not better, even without Tyler Warren. I think that they've got weapons at the tight end position, so I'm not really worried about them as an offense. I like Caldwell a lot. I thought he was very innovative with his offensive play calling. And I think that Drew Aller is figuring some things out as a quarterback, and he's kind of playing into that 5-star ranking. Um, Even though we were questioning that for the past couple of years, I really like the trajectory that he's on, and think that if he can take another step, then this is a potential national championship type of team. Defensively, I feel really comfortable. I know they're losing a good bit, but a good bit of top end talent, that is. But I feel really comfortable in Jim Knowles coming in and making an instant impact. He did that with Ohio State in 2022 and got them to the semifinals. Really had them almost to the point of winning a national championship. I think he does the same thing with Penn State this year, and at least maintains what the defense has been for the Nittany Lions for the past few years, if not elevates it even more with Tom Allen leaving that program.
Yeah, I agree with everything you're saying. The biggest thing for me with Penn State is who's going to step up as a playmaker at wide receiver, and if Penn State can answer that question adequately throughout the offseason and going into next season, then watch out, because defensively we know they're going to be good. They're good every year defensively, and now they bring in a great coach who's going to inherit a defense that, I mean, the cupboard is not empty, that's for sure. So, and then you've got the best running back duo in the country coming back again. Seems like they've been there for 10 years.
Yep.
So you've got the playmakers, in the backfield. You feel decent about the offensive line and the prospect of Penn State being able to field a good offensive line. A wide receiver's got to step up, man, because the leading receivers for this team last year was a tight end and running backs.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to see some wide receiver not only star power, but some depth as well, because we all know injuries stack up as the season goes on.
Yep. And then coming in at number 6, you got Notre Dame. I don't know that they could have any higher expectations than what they have right now. I know you're losing Riley Leonard, and I think that Notre Dame fans feel really comfortable in what they have behind him. And I'm blanking on the quarterback's name right now, but um, I think he looks fine. And Jelly, I believe is his name.
Mm-hmm.
I think he looked fine in what we saw in the one series of the playoffs where he led the team down. I believe they got a touchdown on that series, if I'm not mistaken. But as a passer, he looked very polished, and I feel comfortable in this offense and what they can be behind him at the helm if he wins the starting quarterback position, which I think I'm just expecting that he will. Jeremiah Love returning, I think is huge. This guy kind of put the team on his back at times this season. I really like the running back group as a whole. So couple that with, I believe, an offensive line, if I'm not mistaken, that was pretty young last year. That is going to grow together, and I think you're going to continue to have a pretty strong offense defensively. I just don't have a ton of concerns. I like the defense. Notre Dame to me is a team that if they can figure out the wide receivers, a lot like Penn State, um, they're a dangerous team in 2025 and could be a team that we're talking about as a national championship contender.
Yeah, I mean, Marcus Freeman's doing a really good job there. I don't, you know, I didn't predict Notre Dame to go to the national championship this past season, and I won't be predicting them again, more than likely. We'll look more at the schedule, and we're going to do a deep dive on Notre Dame, so maybe I'll change my mind on that. But after looking at the schedule, but the season opener at Miami is going to be a lot of fun, and
Mm-hmm.
it's going to tell us a lot about this Notre Dame crew right out the gate. And if they can somehow figure out a way to win that game, then watch out. Notre Dame will more than likely be right back in the playoff. Just knowing, what the rest of their schedule is probably going to be looking like, and some of their, normal opponents that they play. All right, let's scoot through the rest of these, because my wife's over here keeps opening the door and telling me let's go. So, but
Gotcha.
Oregon at number 7. What it's really all boils down to one thing for me. Is Dante Moore that dude, or isn't he? That's really what all this boils
Hmm.
down to for me for Oregon. I'll just be honest with you. Dylan Gabriel did a really nice job last year with Oregon. Obviously, they were pretty much number one throughout the entire season for the most part after they had beaten Ohio State, definitely, until they lost. What can Dante Moore transition into that starting role? You like the prospect of it. He's been on the squad, right? He knows what this looks like. He's been working behind the tutelage of Dylan Gabriel and working with his coaching staff. So you feel like he's going to be, and not to mention he's got playing experience, right, from back in the Pac-12 days. So it's not like this is the first time we've ever seen him. So we have a sample size of him, and there's been some great. Man, he's made some great plays. I mean, he really has. He was a lot of fun to watch at UCLA, but he's also made some plays where it was like he was trying to do more with less and trying to force things where there wasn't, an opportunity there. And we'll see how the Oregon roster complements him, and that's going to tell me a whole heck of a lot about where Oregon is going this season. I personally, I mean, I think Oregon is I think they're a top 5 team this season.
Hmm.
So at 7, I guess I would have to say I disagree. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I pretty much agree with you. I think a lot's going to be riding on Dante Moore this year. Also, how does the defense respond? It was a pretty senior laden defense, if I'm remembering correctly. So, how do they respond in losing Jordan Birch and some other players? Got to dig through the roster a little bit more. I trust in Dan Lanning's ability to coach a defense. So, I think that the Oregon defense is still going to be really fast, flying around the football. I think they're going to be really good. I think that they're going to have some good wide receivers as well for Dante Moore to throw to, but we haven't seen the development from Dante Moore yet. We've seen him in limited snaps, I guess, and it hasn't been great so far in his career. Is this the year that he takes the next step? I think that's a big question. Clemson at number 8. I think right now, as of today, I would have Clemson as my pick to win the ACC, so I don't mind them at
Yeah.
8. I like Cade Klubnik coming in. I like Wesco at wide receiver. Got to dig in a little bit more to see kind of what they have in the rushing attack. But I think that they're figuring out some things on the offensive line under Matt Luke as the offensive line coach, and defensively, I haven't had many issues with them. They are undergoing a new offensive coordinator change here, so we'll have to see if they progress and take a step up this year.
Yeah, not much on that. I agree. Cade Klubnik coming back is a big deal. And he has developed a lot over the last couple of years, and I certainly feel as though Cade Klubnik is on the precipice of having his best season yet.
Yep. Tennessee, number 9. Uh, Look, we knew Tennessee was going to be in this top 10, right? Nico coming back another year, another year wiser, I guess you would say. This will be his 3rd year in college football. I think that I like what he's gotten. Mike Matthews. There was some talk about the wide receiver maybe sniffing around and maybe going somewhere else where they're able to hold on to him. And I think that was pretty important for them. What else is important is that they're losing Dylan Sampson, and that's a huge loss for the defense, or excuse me, for Tennessee and for the offense and their running game. I don't know. I don't know if they're going to be able to recover from that. I just don't know much about who they have behind him, but
Yeah.
that's a huge loss. He was an outstanding running back. We'll have to wait and see, but I think that the defense under Tim Brooks is going to be really good once again.
Nico, in my eyes, has got a long ways to go, Mason. I, I'm I just think he's got a long ways to go. And is he going to make big strides this offseason? I think there's a good chance of that. But Dylan Sampson leaving, it doesn't help, right? Over a
Hmm.
1,000 yards last year, tons of productivity, and the usage rate was through the roof, right? So when they needed yards, that's who they gave it to. Um, you're right. I'm totally agree. I totally agree with you. I like Tim Banks and that the prospect of him being able to keep going what he started this past season with the Tennessee defense. We'll see how far that defense can take them, and if Nico can take that next step.
Yep. LSU at number 10. We've talked about them earlier in the show, but I really like Garrett Nussmeier. I think that he's going to be a fine quarterback if he can figure out the decision making. I think that that really cost them in the Texas A&M game. Um, but I'm not worried about the weapons on offense. Um, Defensively, I think that they've got a great defensive coordinator in Blake Baker, but I'm anxious to see what the defensive line looks like. Once again, we're talking about an LSU defensive line that gives up a lot of rushing yards, and they have for the past few years. And it's hard to believe considering the defensive line talent that comes out of that state, that they haven't been better at stopping the run. But that certainly has been the case. Another year of Blake Baker, I think, could help them. But I'm anxious to see who that guy is that steps up because I'm not seeing it on the roster so far.
Yeah, and beyond all of that stuff, there are some really good things going on at LSU roster wise and things like that. Um, Gonna have some off-season drama to deal with, and beyond even that, when the regular season does get started, Mason, it's a hell of a schedule they've got. Road games at Oklahoma, Alabama, Ole Miss, and Clemson. Not to mention they'll be facing off against the next team that we're talking about, South Carolina, who is returning Lenora Sellers, the best returning quarterback that South Carolina's had in a long time. And they're coming off of a season where South Carolina's defense was very, very, very stingy. So if they can keep that trend going, South Carolina could be one of those bumps in the road for LSU. But with that being said, South Carolina is going to be more than just a bump in the road for a lot of these teams. The schedule's tough, as it always is at South Carolina. Games against Missouri, LSU, Ole Miss, and Texas A&M. Alabama and Clemson both come to Columbia, so it's going to be a really, really tough schedule for South Carolina. But I like the prospect of Lenora Sellers making his return, and they're going to be really tough to deal with. I do believe.
Yeah, I mean he's a great quarterback, and I really like the idea of this offense being really good around him. But the defense is what to me kind of sells me on this South Carolina team and the potential of them in 2025. I know that they lose Kyle Kennard, but um, Dylan Stewart is one of one in my opinion as a sophomore defensive player. I think he's the best in the country. And I think around him they've got a lot of depth. They're not losing a ton when you look at the depth for South Carolina. I think that they are very much a playoff potential team in my opinion. Then you've got SMU in the ACC at number 12. I don't hate this. You're starting to get into, and I'll just look at 12 through 15 here. You got SMU, BYU, Alabama. We hadn't talked about Alabama yet. That's surprising. And then Illinois and Arizona State at 16. I mean, you look at 12 through 16 and take your pick there. I mean, you kind of have to look at the schedules and break down all that. We're not getting into all that obviously right now. But out of 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16, who would you have in there at the number 12 spot, Mark?
That's tough to say, man. I think SMU has got as good a chance as anybody just because of the fact of the conference that they play in. And
Mm-hmm.
I hate, I'm not trying to crap on ACC all day today, but I mean, it is what it is, man. Not a very tough conference, and we saw SMU, come from outside the Power Five in their very first year, not even making any money from the ACC, and go and damn near win that conference. So, um, I'm it's kind of wait and see for me, right? There's going to be one of these teams that's right around the 20 to 25 range that's going to jump up there, and they're going to jump into that top 12. I don't know which team that is yet, and I don't know which one I'm putting my money on yet. But I think SMU is a pretty decent one, and I think there's some other teams around the country that are going to make a push for that as well. Super interested to see what a team like Michigan does this season. Super interested to see what a team like Indiana does this season. Florida, Mason. I'm interested to see what Florida does this season with DJ Lagway. Texas A&M, you kind of passed on your list there just a second ago. I think they have the prospect of being in the conversation. I'm not so sure they'll be in the top 12, but and then not to mention, Mason, there's going to be some of the teams that we talked about that aren't going to make it. Maybe Georgia's offense it pans out where it's not very good again, right?
Mhm.
And it's going to be a tough schedule to overcome that if that is the case. Ohio State, they've got a chance to finish 15th in the country this year, or even worse, with all the changes that they've gone on. And it's not, and we all know how talented they are. They're very talented. So there's going to be some surprises here. I think LSU has got the prospect of going 10-2, but we talked about it earlier. They could go 8-4 this year. Um,
Mhm.
so we're so early on. It's going to take some more digging, and we're going to dig through all of these teams as the offseason goes on. And when we get to June and July, guys, we'll do our regular summer routine that we do. We're going to go team by team. We're going to break them down, the whole roster, the whole coaching staff, the schedule, all that good stuff. And we hope that you guys will come and join us for that. Uh, Anything else before we close it out here, Mason? I got to get going down the road here.
Yeah, no. Stay tuned to the channel. We'll probably be back next Sunday, if not before. We're probably going to have a once a week sort of show throughout most of the off season. After spring ball, we'll start ramping up a little bit with our team previews and give you guys a preview, at least one preview a week, if not more. Um, but stay tuned to the channel. Make sure you hit subscribe so you know whenever we go live. And when we're talking about your team or just college football as a whole, whatever your flavor is there, we got you covered.
Yeah, and we'll have clips dropping all week, kind of breaking up our long form live show here. Keep an eye out for that and hit the like button on those bad boys. Hit the like button on this one before you head out. Thank y'all so much for watching. Everybody have a great day. We'll see you guys in about a week. Thank you so much.